You cheated on me. Now you'll pay the price.
The password was written in another man's handwriting. Evan Pike stared at the crumpled piece of paper he'd found in his wife's jeans pocket while sorting laundry. The ink was blue, the letters carefully formed. Nothing like Lena's hurried scrawl. Below the random string of numbers and letters, someone had written private access in the same deliberate script. He'd seen this handwriting before, on contest flyers. On the photography club announcements pinned to the community center bulletin board, Martin Kells, the paper still carried the faint trace of Lena's vanilla perfume, as if she'd held it close to her chest before tucking it away. Evan folded it back up, his hands steady, despite the cold certainty spreading through his chest. 38 years old, 12 years married, and he'd never searched his wife's pockets before today. Maybe he should have started sooner. The Millbrook County Fair smelled like fried dough and diesel fuel, same as it had every August since Evan was 7 years old. He stood behind the photography contest booth, watching Lena adjust her second-place ribbon for the 4th time. The blue satin caught the afternoon light, and her smile was brighter than he'd seen in months. "It's beautiful work, really," Martin Kells was saying, his voice carrying that careful articulation people used when they wanted to sound important. "The composition in your Barn series shows real instinct, natural talent." Lena's cheeks flushed. "I couldn't have done it without your guidance. The way you taught me about shadow and depth." "She's always been artistic," Evan interrupted, stepping closer. "Even before she started coming to your club." Martin's smile didn't waver, but his eyes flicked to Evan with something that might have been calculation. "Of course, I just helped her see what was already there. Lena has tremendous potential." The way he said her name, like he was tasting something sweet, made Evan's jaw tighten. But he kept his expression neutral, the same face he wore when dealing with difficult customers at the hardware store. "Well, we should let you get back to judging," Evan said. "Come on, honey, Mom wants to see your ribbon before we head home." Lena's hand found Martin's arm instead of Evan's. "Actually, Martin was telling me about a special critique session tonight. For the top winners. It could really help me improve for next year." "Tonight?" Evan looked around the fairground. "But the contest is over." "That's exactly why tonight's perfect," Martin said. "No distractions. We can really focus on technique. The lighting in my studio is much better than these outdoor conditions." Lena was already nodding. "I'll be home by 10, maybe 11. She kissed Evan's cheek, a quick distracted peck, and walked away with Martin toward the parking area. Evan watched them go, noting how she leaned in when Martin spoke, how her laugh carried back over the carnival music. The second-place ribbon fluttered from her purse like a small victory flag. He found himself still standing there 20 minutes later when the Hart twins ran up asking if he'd seen their mother. "Try the pie tent," he told them, but he wasn't really thinking about lost parents or county fair logistics. He was thinking about the way Martin had looked at his wife, like a man appraising something he intended to buy. The password paper wasn't the first thing Evan had found. 2 weeks after the fair, he'd started noticing the small changes. Lena bought new makeup, expensive stuff from the department store instead of her usual drugstore brands. She'd started wearing perfume on Tuesday evenings, which happened to be when Martin's photography club met. Her phone buzzed more often, and she'd developed a habit of carrying it to the bathroom. But the paper was proof. He sat in their bedroom, the laundry basket at his feet, and studied the handwriting again. Private Gallery 47, followed by a string of numbers. The paper was nice, heavier stock than regular notebook paper, like someone had torn it from an expensive journal. Downstairs, he heard Lena's car door slam. She'd been at another session with Martin, this one running until almost midnight. Through the window, he watched her check her reflection in the side mirror before walking to the house. "How was photography class?" he asked when she came upstairs. "Good. We worked on portrait lighting. Martin says I'm developing a real eye for it." She was already moving toward the bathroom, phone in hand. "I'm just going to wash up." Evan slipped the paper into his wallet and finished folding their clothes. When Lena came out of the bathroom, she was wearing the new perfume again, even though she was about to go to sleep. "You smell nice," he said. She looked startled. "Oh, thanks. I was just testing it out. For tomorrow?" "Tomorrow? You got your camera bag all packed by the door. Figured you had another shoot planned." Lena's smile was bright and quick. "Just a small project," Martin suggested. Nothing major. She slid into bed and turned away from him, claiming she was tired. But Evan lay awake, listening to her breathe, knowing from the rhythm that she was awake too. In the morning, she left before he finished his coffee. Through the kitchen window, he watched her load not just her camera bag, but a small suitcase into her car, the kind she used for overnight trips. For a photography session that was supposedly nothing major. Evan tried the password on Martin's website first. The photography club had a basic page with meeting times and some sample photos, landscapes mostly, a few portraits of local high school seniors. The login box in the corner accepted the username but rejected the password. He sat in his truck during lunch break, parked behind Hendrick's feed store where the cell signal was strong, and tried variations. Maybe Lena had copied it wrong. Maybe there were typos. Nothing worked. That evening, while Lena was supposedly at book club, except she'd left her book on the kitchen table, Evan tried again. This time, he noticed something he'd missed before. The main website URL ended in .com, but there was a small link at the bottom of the page. Members area. The members area had a different URL structure. When he plugged in the password there, everything changed. The screen went black for a moment, then loaded a simple gallery interface. No fancy graphics or professional design, just rows of thumbnail images organized in folders. The first folder was labeled L. Pike, Works in Progress. Evan's coffee went cold in his hands. The early photos were innocent enough. Lena in the town park, sitting on a bench with golden hour lighting. Lena by the old mill, her hair catching the wind. Professional quality, the kind of shots that belonged in magazines. But as he scrolled deeper, the images shifted. Lena in softer lighting, wearing a sundress with thin straps. Lena laughing, the camera catching her in a moment of unguarded happiness that Evan hadn't seen directed at him in months. Then the folder labeled Studio Sessions. These photos were different, intimate. Lena posed against weathered barnwood, her shirt unbuttoned just enough to suggest without revealing. Lena in what looked like the ruins of the old Patterson house, wearing something that was more suggestion than clothing. The camera loved her. Or maybe Martin did. Evan's hands were shaking when he heard her car in the driveway. He slammed the laptop shut and was washing dishes when she came in, humming something under her breath. "Good book club?" he asked. We talked about that new memoir everyone's reading. You know, the one about the woman who left her husband to find herself. She kissed the back of his neck as she passed, and he could smell cigarette smoke in her hair. Lena hadn't smoked since college, but Martin did. Evan had seen him outside the community center, lighting up between club sessions. "Sounds interesting," Evan said. "Maybe I should read it." Lena paused on her way upstairs. It's really more of a woman's book, about female empowerment and breaking free from limitations. What kind of limitations? But she was already gone, her footsteps light on the stairs, her phone already buzzing with messages. Eleanor Briggs had worked at the Millbrook Public Library for 37 years before retiring, and in that time she'd developed an encyclopedic knowledge of the town's secrets. She was also Evan's father's sister, which meant she'd inherited the Pike family talent for quiet observation and long memory. Evan found her in the local history section, cataloging old newspapers with the meticulous care she brought to everything. "Looking for anything in particular?" she asked when he approached. Eleanor had never been one for small talk. "Information about the town's art history," Evan said, "for a display at the store. Thought I'd feature some local artists, photographers, that sort of thing." Eleanor's pale eyes sharpened with interest. "Well, we've had several photographers over the years. Most recently, that Martin Kells fellow. Moved here about 3 years ago from somewhere downstate. Set up his little club. You know much about his work?" "I know about his pattern." Eleanor pulled a chair closer, settling in for a proper conversation. "He targets the photography club members. Always the women, mind you. Starts with genuine instruction, builds their confidence, makes them feel special, artistic, then gradually pushes for more. Experimental work." Evan kept his expression carefully neutral. "Experimental how?" "Oh, he's clever about it. Never anything overtly inappropriate at first. But he has a way of making his subjects feel like they're part of something important. Something artistic and meaningful. Meanwhile, he's building quite the collection." "Collection?" Eleanor leaned back in her chair. "Martha Yates was in his club for about 6 months 2 years ago. Lovely girl. Works at the bank. She told me Martin convinced her to pose for what he called fine art portraiture. Nothing explicit, he assured her. All very tasteful and professional. What happened? She eventually realized the photos were ending up in places she hadn't agreed to. Online galleries, photography forums. He claimed it was for artistic critique and networking, but Martha felt exploited. She left the club. Evan's stomach tightened. Did she report it? Report what? She'd signed releases, and Martin was careful never to cross any legal lines. He's good at staying just on the right side of consent while pushing every other boundary. Eleanor stood and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a folder of old newspaper clippings. The thing is, Martha wasn't the first, and she won't be the last. I've seen this pattern 3 times now since he arrived. Young women join his club, get swept up in his promises about their artistic potential, agree to increasingly intimate photo sessions, then eventually drift away when they realize what's really happening. She handed Evan a photo from the newspaper. Archives? Martin at a local art show, beaming beside a display of landscape photos. He's very good at maintaining his reputation, pillars of the artistic community and all that, but the women who've worked with him privately, well, they tell a different story. Eleanor, Evan said carefully, if someone wanted to know more about his methods, how would they go about it? His aunt's expression didn't change, but something in her posture sharpened. Hypothetically speaking, well, I imagine someone with computer skills could find his work online easily enough. He's quite proud of his portfolio. And I hear he keeps extensive archives, never deletes anything, no matter what he tells his subjects about removing photos after a certain time. Eleanor returned the newspaper clippings to their folder with precise movements. Of course, that's just gossip. But in a town this size, gossip has a way of being remarkably accurate. She looked directly at Evan then, and he saw something in her eyes that reminded him of his father, the Pike family talent for seeing what other people missed. If you're planning that display for the store, she said, I'd be careful about which photographers you choose to feature. Some artists are better left uncelebrated. The Fall Heritage Parade happened every October, and it was the kind of mandatory community event that shut down Main Street for 3 hours, while the entire town watched floats commemorate local history. Evan had been attending for 30 years, first with his parents, then with Lena. This year, Lena had begged off, claiming a headache. Evan stood with the Hendricks family near the reviewing stand, watching the high school marching band struggle through a medley of patriotic songs when he saw her. She was 2 blocks away, walking quickly down Pine Street in what he'd learned to recognize as her shooting outfit. The artfully distressed jeans and flowing blouse that photographed well in natural light. Her camera bag was slung over her shoulder, and she was checking her phone as she walked. Pine Street led to only one destination worth photographing, Martin's studio. Evan excused himself from the Hendricks and followed at a distance. The parade route was crowded enough that no one noticed him leaving. By the time he reached Pine Street, Lena had disappeared, but Martin's studio windows glowed with warm light. The studio was a converted warehouse space with large windows and exposed brick walls. Perfect for photography, Martin always said. Evan had never been inside. He circled to the back of the building where a service door stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, he could hear voices. Lena's laugh, bright and delighted, followed by Martin's lower murmur. That's perfect. Hold that pose. The light is incredible on you right now. Are you sure this is artistic enough? I don't want to look. Trust me, you're a natural. The camera sees what I see, someone beautiful and confident, someone who isn't afraid to be herself. Evan pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The back area was cluttered with equipment, lights on stands, reflectors, cables running across the floor. But it was the walls that made him stop breathing. Corkboards covered every available surface, and pinned to them were dozens of photographs. Not the polished, finished work from Martin's website, but contact sheets and proof prints. Raw, unedited images that showed every angle, every outtake, every moment between poses. And there, among photos of at least 6 other women, was Lena. The images spanned months. Lena in the early days of their sessions, laughing and self-conscious. Lena growing more comfortable with the camera, more willing to experiment with poses and wardrobe. Lena in various stages of undress, her expression increasingly confident. But what struck Evan most was the progression. Martin hadn't just been taking photos. He'd been documenting a seduction. The images told the story of a woman falling under someone's influence, frame by frame. Let's try something a little different. Martin's voice drifted from the front of the studio. There's a vulnerability in your eyes that the camera loves. Don't hide from it. Evan moved closer to the corkboards, studying the contact sheets with professional attention to detail. His father had taught him to read blueprints, to see the whole structure from partial information. These photos were blueprints of manipulation. He pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of the corkboards, working quickly but methodically. Evidence, documentation, proof of what was happening. A floorboard creaked behind him. Evan spun around, expecting to see Martin or Lena, but the back area was empty. The sound came again, definitely footsteps, but from somewhere else in the building. Someone else was here. He pocketed his phone and moved toward the service door. But before he could reach it, he heard Lena's voice again, much closer now. I should probably head home soon. The parade will be over, and Evan will wonder where I am. Of course. We got some beautiful shots today. I think you'll be very pleased with how they turned out. When will they be ready? I'll have them edited by next week. I'll send them to your private gallery folder, so you can review them before we decide which ones to include in your portfolio. Evan slipped out the service door and around the side of the building, his heart hammering. By the time Lena emerged from the front entrance, he was half a block away, blending with the crowd dispersing from the parade. He watched her walk to her car, saw the satisfied smile on her face, the relaxed set of her shoulders. She looked like a woman returning from something fulfilling and secret. When she arrived home 20 minutes later, she was holding an ice pack to her forehead and complaining about her headache. The next evening, Evan cooked dinner while Lena graded papers at the kitchen table. Art assignments from her part-time teaching job at the elementary school, children's drawings of houses and trees and families, all bright colors and optimistic proportions. "How was your day?" she asked without looking up from a drawing of what appeared to be a purple dinosaur. "Busy. Jim Hendricks came in looking for those specialty hinges for his barn restoration. Had to special order them." She was texting under the table. Evan could see her thumb moving against the screen of her phone, could see the small smile that crossed her face when a response came back. "How was your headache?" he asked. "Better. I took some aspirin and lay down for a while." "That's good. I was worried about you missing the parade. You always enjoy the parade." Finally, Lena looked up. "I just wasn't feeling social, you know? Sometimes you need quiet time to recharge." Evan set a plate in front of her, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the same meal she'd requested every Sunday for 12 years. She took a bite and made an appreciative noise, but her attention was already drifting back to her phone. "This is delicious. You're getting really good at the seasoning. I've been making the same recipe for a decade." "Well, you're improving." Her phone buzzed again. This time, she couldn't hide the brightness that came into her face when she read the message. "Good news?" Evan asked. "Oh, just... Martin thinks I'm ready to enter a bigger photography competition. There's one in the city that could really get my work noticed." Evan cut his meat with careful precision. "You already are noticed. Your work is good." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're talented. You always have been. You don't need validation from competitions or mentors." Lena's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Martin isn't just a mentor. He's helping me see possibilities I never knew existed. He believes in my potential." "What kind of potential?" "Artistic potential, creative potential. The possibility of being something more than a small-town art teacher who draws flowers with second graders." Her voice had taken on a defensive edge, and Evan recognized the speech pattern. These weren't her words. They were Martin's, repeated back with the fervor of someone who'd been convinced they were true. "There's nothing wrong with being a small-town art teacher," he said. "No, of course not. But there's also nothing wrong with wanting more, with pursuing real art, real recognition." "Real art?" Lena set down her fork. "You know what I mean. Professional work, gallery shows. The kind of photography that matters. And your family photos don't matter? The pictures you take of your nieces, the landscapes you shoot when we go camping, those don't count as real art?" "That's not what I meant." But her phone was buzzing again, and her attention divided between the conversation and whatever message was lighting up her screen. She typed a quick response, and Evan caught a glimpse of the contact name, M Studio. I have to go out for a bit, she said suddenly, standing up. Martin wants to discuss the competition submission requirements. It's important to get the details right. Now, we just started dinner. This won't take long, an hour, maybe two. She was already moving toward the door, grabbing her purse and jacket. Don't wait up. I know how early you have to get up for work. After she left, Evan sat at the kitchen table and finished his pot roast alone. Her plate sat across from him, barely touched, growing cold. Outside, October darkness was settling over Millbrook, and somewhere in the warm light of Martin's studio, his wife was discovering new possibilities she'd never known existed. Evan cleared the table and washed the dishes, thinking about potential and recognition and the kind of art that mattered. Then he went upstairs to his computer and opened the private gallery again. There were new photos in Lena's folder. Taken today, judging by her clothing and the lighting. In these images, she looked directly into the camera with an expression Evan hadn't seen in their bedroom for months. Confident, sensual, alive. She looked like a woman who was falling in love. Evan started following Martin on Thursday nights. It wasn't difficult. Millbrook was small enough that there were only so many places to go, and Martin's schedule was predictable. Photography club until 9, then drinks at Murphy's Tavern until 10:30, then a stop at the 24-hour gas station for cigarettes and coffee. But on Thursday nights, Martin made an additional stop. Millbrook Self-Storage sat on the edge of town, a collection of beige metal buildings surrounded by chain-link fence. Martin's Toyota pulled through the gate at exactly 11:15, drove to Unit C47, and parked. Evan watched from across the street, engine off, as Martin unlocked the roll-up door and spent 20 minutes inside the unit. When he came out, he was carrying a large equipment case, the kind photographers used for expensive lenses or lighting gear. The following Thursday, the pattern repeated. This time, Martin spent longer inside the unit, and when he emerged, he had 2 equipment cases. On Friday, Evan stopped by the storage facility during lunch break. The office manager was Dale Morrison, who'd graduated 2 years behind Evan and had been selling insurance until the storage business proved more profitable. Evan Pike! Haven't seen you in forever! How's Lena doing with her photography hobby? Good, actually. That's kind of why I'm here. I was thinking about surprising her with some equipment storage. You know how much gear photographers accumulate. Tell me about it. We've got that Martin Kells guy with 2 units already. C47 and C52. Says one's for props and backdrops, the other's set up like a darkroom. Dale pulled out a site map and pointed to the locations. These corner units are popular with the creative types. More space, better ventilation. Though I have to say, Kells is the first guy I've rented to who installed his own electrical hookup. Had an electrician out there and everything? Electrical hookup? Yeah, for his computer equipment. Says he does digital processing out there, needs climate control for his servers. Guy's serious about his work. I'll give him that. Evan studied the map, noting the layout of access roads and security camera positions. What kind of hours do people usually access their units? 24/7. That's part of our service. Some of these photographer types work odd schedules, you know? Kells is usually here late at night, but the gate code works anytime. Dale gave Evan a brochure and his business card. You let me know if Lena wants to take a look at our available units. I'd be happy to show you around. That evening, Evan sat in his truck across from the storage facility and thought about darkrooms and servers, and the kind of equipment that required professional electrical installation. He thought about backup files and private galleries and the difference between art and exploitation. Most of all, he thought about Eleanor's words. He never deletes anything, no matter what he tells his subjects about removing photos after a certain time. Evan didn't break into Martin's storage unit. He didn't need to. Instead, he attended Martin's next open studio night. The monthly events were advertised in the local paper as Photography Appreciation Evenings, chances for the community to see local artistic work and maybe sign up for classes. Martin charged $5 admission, provided cheap wine and cheese cubes, and displayed his best landscape and portrait work on easels throughout the studio. Evan bought a ticket under the name E. Patterson, close enough to his real name that he'd respond if called, different enough to avoid immediate recognition. He paid cash and arrived fashionably late when the studio was crowded enough for anonymity. Martin worked the room like a politician, discussing technique with amateur photographers and complimenting wives on their artistic eye. He wore a black button-down shirt and expensive jeans, looking every inch the professional artist he claimed to be. The key to compelling portraiture, he was telling a small group near the window, is finding the subject's essential truth. The camera sees past pretense to the person underneath. When someone trusts you completely, that's when you capture something profound. Evan sipped his wine and studied the studio layout. Professional lighting equipment, clearly expensive. Multiple camera bodies and lenses organized with military precision. A computer workstation in one corner, complete with high-end monitors and what looked like a server rack. But it was the events calendar on the wall that made him stop walking. October was marked with regular club meetings and individual appointment slots. But November showed something different. Members-only gallery, private works exhibition scheduled for the second Friday of the month. Evan memorized the date and moved closer to the computer workstation. The monitors were turned off, but he could see the equipment set up clearly. External hard drives connected to a main tower. A printer capable of producing gallery-quality enlargements. Network cables running to what Dale had described as servers. This wasn't just a photography studio, it was a production facility. Interested in the technical side? Martin appeared beside him, wine glass in hand. Most people focus on the artistic aspects, but the equipment is fascinating too. Evan turned, hoping his fake name would be enough if Martin had paid attention to the guest list. Impressive setup. I do some amateur photography myself. Digital workflow is essential these days. I maintain extensive archives of all my work. Multiple backups, cloud storage, the whole system. You never know when an image might become significant. Significant how? Martin's smile had an edge to it. Well, you develop relationships with your subjects over time. Sometimes work that seems purely local or personal ends up having broader artistic merit. I like to be prepared for those opportunities. He gestured toward the calendar. In fact, I'm organizing a special exhibition next month. Very selective audience. The kind of work that requires a more sophisticated appreciation. What kind of work? Intimate portraiture, the human form in various states of vulnerability and strength. Not everyone understands the artistic value of such images, but for those who do, Martin shrugged. It can be quite powerful. Evan nodded as if this made perfect sense. Sounds interesting. I'm always looking for people who appreciate serious photography. If you're interested in attending, I could add you to the invitation list. That would be great. Martin pulled out his phone. E. Patterson, right? What's your email? Evan gave him a Gmail address he'd created for online purchases and watched Martin add him to a contact list labeled Private Exhibitions. 20 minutes later, Evan was back in his truck, his $5 wine still churning in his stomach. He'd seen enough to understand the scope of what Martin was doing. This wasn't just about Lena. This was a business model. The invitation arrived 3 days before the event. You are cordially invited to attend a private works exhibition featuring intimate portraiture by Martin Kells, Friday, November 10th, 7 p.m. Wine and light refreshments provided. Space is limited to ensure an appropriate viewing environment. Evan drove to the next town over and bought a blazer he'd never wear again, along with the kind of glasses people associated with artistic types. The disguise was probably unnecessary. Martin's attention would be focused on his exhibition, but Evan had learned the value of caution. He arrived at 7:15, when the gallery was already filled with 24 people. See, some faces he recognized from around town, the bank president's wife, a retired professor from the community college, several people he'd seen at other cultural events, the kind of crowd that prided itself on sophistication and open-mindedness. The studio had been transformed. Professional lighting created gallery ambience, and wine tables anchored each corner. But it was the photographs that commanded attention. Large format prints hung on temporary walls throughout the space, each one lit to museum standard. And there, blown up to poster size, was his wife. Lena reclined against weathered barnwood, wearing a white shirt unbuttoned to reveal the curve of her shoulder. The lighting was golden and warm, the composition technically perfect. In the photograph, she looked directly into the camera with an expression of complete trust and growing desire. The placard below read, Private Muse Series, LP. Silver gelatin print. Evan moved through the exhibition methodically, his phone discreetly capturing each image. There were 6 photographs of Lena in total, documenting what looked like several months of sessions. In the progression, he could see her growing comfort with the camera, her increasing willingness to be vulnerable in front of Martin's lens. But she wasn't the only subject. The walls featured intimate portraits of at least 4 other women, all shot with the same technical skill and careful lighting, all labeled as private muse projects, all clearly taken without expectation of public display. Powerful work, isn't it? Evan turned to find an older woman studying Lena's photographs with academic interest. She wore the kind of expensive scarf that signaled cultural literacy. Very striking, Evan agreed. Martin has such a gift for capturing feminine essence. These women look so free, so unguarded. It takes tremendous skill to create that level of trust between artist and subject. Across the room, Martin was discussing technique with a small group, his voice carrying the familiar tone of artistic authority. The key is creating an environment where the subject feels completely safe to be herself. When someone trusts you with their vulnerability, the camera captures something profound. One of the listeners, a woman Evan didn't recognize, raised her hand slightly. How do you get subjects to agree to such intimate work? It must require considerable persuasion. Martin's laugh was warm and confident. Not persuasion, education. Many people have been conditioned to think of the human form as something shameful rather than beautiful. My role is to help them see themselves as I see them, as works of art worthy of celebration. He gestured toward Lena's photographs. This subject, for instance, came to me as a complete beginner. Talented but insecure, unsure of her artistic potential. Through our work together, she discovered aspects of herself she never knew existed. The transformation is visible in the progression of images. Evan's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his expression neutral. Around him, the gallery audience nodded with appreciation, treating his wife's private moments as artistic statements to be analyzed and discussed. His phone vibrated with a text message from Lena. Working late on lesson plans. Don't wait up. He looked at the timestamp, 7:47 p.m. She was supposed to be at school grading papers and preparing for Monday's classes. But when he glanced toward the studio's back entrance, he saw a familiar silhouette through the frosted glass. Someone was waiting in the alley behind the building. Evan excused himself from the gallery, walked around the block, and approached the alley from the opposite direction. Lena's car was parked in the shadows, and she was sitting behind the wheel, checking her appearance in the rearview mirror. She was dressed for a gallery opening. Elegant black dress, makeup more sophisticated than her usual school attire, jewelry he hadn't seen her wear since their anniversary dinner 2 years ago. As he watched, she stepped out of her car and walked toward the studio's back entrance. Martin appeared in the doorway, greeting her with a kiss on both cheeks and words Evan couldn't hear from his position. Then they disappeared inside together. 15 minutes later, Martin returned to the front gallery and announced to his guests that he had a special surprise. The artist would be meeting with one of his muses to discuss the creative process. The gallery crowd murmured with anticipation, wine glasses raised in preparation for what they clearly expected to be an enlightening artistic discussion. Evan finished photographing the exhibition and left through the front entrance. By the time he reached his truck, he had documented every image in Martin's show and confirmed that his wife was actively participating in her own public humiliation. The only question now was whether she understood what was happening, or if she still believed she was part of something artistic and meaningful. Eleanor called Evan on Monday morning while he was opening the hardware store. "You might want to sit down for this," she said without preamble. Evan unlocked the front door and flipped the sign from closed to open, then settled behind the counter with his coffee. "What's going on?" "I had coffee with Martha Yates yesterday." "You remember Martha? Works at the bank, was in Martin's photography club a couple years back." "I remember." "Well, Martha's been keeping an eye on Martin's activities since her own experience with him. Partly out of concern for other women, partly because she never quite got over the feeling that he took advantage of her." Eleanor paused and Evan could hear pages turning. She was reading from notes. "According to Martha, Martin's been bragging around town about a big opportunity. Seems he's caught the attention of some gallery owner in the city. Fellow named Vincent Carrera, who specializes in contemporary portraiture. Go on. Carrera's coming to Millbrook next weekend to review Martin's portfolio. If he likes what he sees, he wants to feature some of Martin's intimate works in a show he's planning for January. Martin's calling it his big break." Evan's grip tightened on his coffee mug. "What kind of show? The kind that would put those private photographs in front of hundreds of strangers. Martha says Martin's beside himself with excitement. He thinks this could launch his career on a national level. And the women in the photographs, does he care what happens to them when their images end up in a city gallery? That's exactly what Martha asked him, apparently. His response was that true artists understand that art belongs to the world, not to individual subjects. He seemed to think the women should be flattered by the exposure. Eleanor's voice carried the sharp edge it got when she was truly angry. Evan, if those photographs end up in a public exhibition, every person in that gallery will be able to identify the subjects. Small-town women, most of them married, all of them believing they were creating something private and artistic. How long do we have? Carrera arrives Saturday. Martin's planning to show him the full collection. Not just the edited highlights from his gallery night, but everything. The raw sessions, the progression shots, what he calls the complete artistic narrative. Evan was quiet for so long that Eleanor finally spoke again. You still there? I'm here. Eleanor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Always am. If someone wanted to rent the community center hall for next weekend, how would they go about it? There was another pause, longer this time. Well, Eleanor said carefully, they'd need to contact the booking coordinator. That would be Susan Miller. But the hall's usually booked months in advance for events. What if there was a cancellation? Funny you should ask. The Henderson wedding reception was supposed to be Saturday night, but they broke up last week. Susan mentioned she was looking for someone to take the date so the center doesn't lose the revenue. Evan pulled out a pen and paper. What time was the Henderson reception supposed to start? 7 o'clock. Same time as Martin's usual gallery events. Eleanor, if I were to rent that hall for Saturday night, would you be willing to help me with something? Depends on what you have in mind. I'm thinking about hosting an art exhibition of my own, but I'd need someone with your research skills to help me put together the right kind of display. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note of satisfaction. I think that sounds like a wonderful idea. And I believe I know exactly what kind of display would be most educational for our community. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me after we see how this all turns out. After Eleanor hung up, Evan sat in his empty store and thought about timing. Saturday was 5 days away. 5 days to plan, organize, and execute something that would end this situation permanently. He picked up his phone and called Susan Miller about renting the community center hall. Evan spent Tuesday evening at the print shop in the next town over, using equipment that could produce gallery-quality enlargements. The images he'd photographed at Martin's exhibition were clear enough to reproduce at poster size, and the shop owner asked no questions about content as long as the bill was paid in cash. But these weren't the carefully edited, romantically lit photographs Martin had displayed. These were the raw files Evan had found in the studio, the unguarded moments between poses, the awkward angles, the unflattering lighting that revealed every flaw and imperfection. For every dreamy, artistic portrait Martin had created, there were dozens of outtakes showing the reality behind the illusion. Subjects checking their hair, adjusting uncomfortable poses, looking uncertain or self-conscious. The unglamorous truth of what happened when ordinary people tried to become art objects. Wednesday, he rented tables and easels from the party supply store. Thursday, he printed invitations using the same design template as Martin's private exhibition announcements, but with one crucial difference. Community art exhibition, an educational display of local photography, all welcome. Friday evening, while Lena was at another lesson planning session, Evan set up his counter exhibition in the community center hall. The layout mirrored Martin's gallery exactly. Wine tables in the corners, professional lighting on borrowed easels, even the same classical music playlist. But instead of romantic artistic statements, the walls displayed the awkward reality of amateur portraiture. Every photograph was labeled with clinical precision. Raw session file hash 47, unedited, or between poses documentation, LP. Subject: the effect was devastating, like seeing a magic trick explained in slow motion. Evan had sent invitations to the same list Martin used for his private exhibitions, plus a broader mailing to community leaders, school board members, and anyone else who might be interested in understanding what was happening in their towns. Artistic community. Saturday evening at 7 o'clock, the first guests arrived. By 7:15, the community center hall was fuller than it had been for any event in recent memory. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Guests moved through the exhibition in stunned silence, comparing the raw documentation to their memories of Martin's polished gallery. Conversations started in whispers and grew louder as the implications became clear. My God! Is that Lena Pike? Look at this progression. He documented everything. She had no idea these existed, did she? How many other women are there? By 8 o'clock, phones were out and people were sharing images on social media. Someone started live streaming sections of the exhibition, and the community center's Wi-Fi couldn't handle the sudden traffic. That's when Lena arrived. She burst through the main entrance wearing the black dress from Martin's gallery night, clearly expecting to find a different kind of exhibition. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally horrified understanding. "What is this?" she demanded, loud enough for the entire hall to hear. Conversation stopped. Every face in the room turned toward her, and Evan saw the moment she realized that everyone knew. Everyone had seen. Everyone understood exactly what she'd been doing in Martin's studio. "This is your art," Evan said quietly. "All of it. Not just the pretty parts." Lena's eyes darted from photograph to photograph, seeing herself from angles she'd never imagined existed. The raw files showed every moment of uncertainty, every awkward pose, every time she'd looked to Martin for reassurance or approval. "You had no right. I had every right. You're my wife. These are photographs of my wife, displayed without your knowledge or consent, just like you displayed them without mine." Martin burst through the entrance then, his face flushed with rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing? This is theft. This is defamation." The crowd parted to let him through, and Evan could see people recording everything on their phones. Martin's outrage would be preserved and shared, just like everything else. "I didn't steal anything," Evan said calmly. "You kept the backups. I just used them. You broke into my studio. Your studio was open during a public event. Your computer files were accessible with passwords you distributed. I documented what you showed me." Martin looked around the room, finally understanding the scope of what was happening. His private exhibition had become public. His carefully controlled narrative had been replaced by raw truth. "This is harassment," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No," said Eleanor, stepping forward from the crowd. "Harassment is convincing women to pose for private photographs and then displaying them publicly without consent. This is education." She gestured toward the walls of documentation. "The community deserves to understand what's been happening in the name of art education." Lena was crying now, not the elegant tears of artistic emotion, but the ugly, desperate crying of someone whose carefully constructed image had just collapsed. "Evan, please. We can talk about this at home. We don't need to do this here. We tried talking at home. You lied to me for months." "I never lied." "You said you were grading papers. You were here, participating in this." He gestured toward the photographs. "You said you were at book club. You were posing for pictures you hoped would make you famous." Lena looked around the room at faces she'd known for years, parents of her students, members of her church, neighbors who'd watched her grow up. All of them had now seen her in ways she'd intended only for Martin's camera. "I thought I was creating something beautiful," she whispered. "You were creating content for a predator's business model." Martin stepped between them, his artistic persona finally cracking. "You don't understand anything about art or the creative process. Those photographs represent months of work, genuine artistic collaboration. They represent months of exploitation," Eleanor interrupted. "We've done our research, Mr. Kells. We know about Martha Yates. We know about Sarah Chen and Rebecca Torres and all the others. The same pattern, the same promises, the same private galleries that somehow become public exhibitions." The crowd murmured, and Evan saw recognition on several faces. Other people were putting pieces together, remembering friends who joined Martin's club and then quietly drifted away. "This is a small town," Eleanor continued. "We talk to each other. We compare notes. And when someone preys on our women in the name of art education, we respond accordingly." Martin looked around the room and seemed to realize that his position was untenable. The community had seen the evidence. They understood the pattern. His reputation was finished. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," he told Evan. "I'm sure we will. But since everything I've displayed came from your own files and was obtained during a public event you hosted, I'm not particularly worried about the legal implications." Martin started toward the exit, but Lena caught his arm. "Wait. What about my portfolio? What about the city exhibition? You said—" Martin pulled away from her grasp. "That's over, all of it. Thanks to your husband's sabotage, none of this work can be shown professionally. But I promised you opportunities that your husband just destroyed. You want to blame someone for your humiliation? Don't blame me. He walked out, leaving Lena standing alone in the middle of an exhibition that documented her private shame for the entire community to see. Eleanor stepped forward and gently took Lena's arm. "You won't find much light left here," she said quietly. It was both practical advice and poetic judgment. The community center's fluorescent lights were harsh and unforgiving, nothing like the golden warmth of Martin's studio. Under this illumination, the photographs looked exactly like what they were: documentation of manipulation and exploitation. Lena shrugged away from Eleanor's touch. "Don't," she said. "Don't pretend to care now. I do care. That's why this needed to happen." "This needed to happen?" Lena's voice rose again. "This public humiliation needed to happen?" "Yes," Eleanor said simply, "because what Martin was doing to you, to all of you, was worse than humiliation. It was theft. He stole your privacy, your dignity, and your agency, then convinced you to be grateful for it." Around the room, the exhibition continued. People moved from photograph to photograph, understanding more with each image how the manipulation had worked. The documentation told a story of gradual boundary erosion, each session pushing slightly further than the last. "He made me feel special," Lena said, her voice breaking. "Like I was talented, like I had potential." "You are talented," Evan said. "You always have been." But Martin didn't want to develop your talent. He wanted to exploit it. "You don't understand what it's like!" Lena turned on him with sudden fury. "You don't understand what it's like to feel invisible, to feel like you're just existing instead of living. Martin saw something in me that you haven't seen in years. Martin saw Mark. Someone insecure enough to believe his promises and desperate enough to compromise her values for attention." The words hit like physical blows, and Lena staggered backward. But Evan wasn't finished. He saw a married woman who felt underappreciated, and he told her exactly what she wanted to hear: that she was artistic, that she deserved better, that her husband was holding her back from her true potential. Stop. He saw someone who would gradually agree to more intimate photographs if he framed them as artistic growth. Someone who would keep secrets from her family if he convinced her those secrets were sophisticated and mature. Stop it. He saw someone who would eventually believe that displaying her private moments to strangers was a form of liberation, not exploitation. Lena's face crumpled. "I never wanted this. I never wanted everyone to see. I thought they were just for his artistic development. He said they were helping him grow as a photographer. And you believed him because you wanted to believe him. Because he told you that you were special." The community center had grown quiet again, guests listening to a marriage dissolve in real time. Some looked uncomfortable with the intimacy of the moment, but no one left. This was the conclusion they'd come to witness. "Evan," Lena said, her voice small and desperate, "we can fix this. We can move somewhere else, start over. No one has to know about any of this." She gestured toward the photographs covering the walls. "We can leave all this behind us. Everyone already knows. And even if we moved, even if we started over, you'd still be the person who chose this. You'd still be the person who spent months lying to me while letting another man photograph you like this. I was confused. I made mistakes. You made choices. Every session with Martin was a choice. Every lie you told me was a choice. Every time you put on that perfume and drove to his studio, you chose him over our marriage." Lena looked around the room at the evidence of her choices displayed on every wall. Raw files that showed not just her body, but her eager collaboration in her own exploitation. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "I want you to understand what you did. To us, to yourself, to the other women Martin manipulated the same way. I want you to understand that there are consequences for choices." "And then what? What happens after I understand?" Evan looked at his wife, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in months. She was still beautiful, still the woman he'd married 12 years ago. But she was also a stranger who had prioritized her own desires over their relationship, who had believed that secret intimacy with another man was a form of artistic growth. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I know it doesn't start with pretending this didn't happen." Evan left without raising his voice. He didn't storm out or slam doors or deliver a dramatic final speech. He simply walked to the exit, nodding politely to neighbors and community members as if he were leaving any other town event. "Evan!" Lena called after him. "Evan, wait!" He stopped at the door but didn't turn around. "We need to talk about this. We needed to talk months ago, before you started lying to me. Before you started believing that what you were doing was artistic instead of adultery. It wasn't adultery. Martin and I never." Now Evan did turn around, and his expression was colder than Lena had ever seen it. "You gave another man the intimacy that belonged to our marriage. You shared parts of yourself with him that you stopped sharing with me. You lied to me so you could spend time with him. What would you call it?" Lena opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Around them, the community center crowd pretended not to listen while hanging on every word. "You chose him," Evan said simply. "Every time you had a choice between honesty with me and excitement with him, you chose him. The only reason it didn't become physical is because he got what he wanted without having to bother." He pulled his truck keys from his pocket. "The exhibition will be here through Sunday. People can see for themselves what Martin's artistic collaboration actually looked like, what my wife actually chose to do." "Evan, please!" But he was already walking toward the parking lot, leaving Lena standing in the harsh fluorescent light surrounded by photographic evidence of her poor choices. Outside, Evan sat in his truck for a moment before starting the engine. Through the community center windows, he could see people still moving through the exhibition, still pointing at photographs, still discussing what they'd learned about their local art scene. His phone buzzed with a text message from someone at the exhibition. "Holy crap, is this really what's been going on?" Then another. "How long has this been happening?" And another. "Where is Martin now?" Evan deleted the messages without responding and drove home. The house felt different when he walked in, quieter, more honest. Lena's photography equipment was still arranged in the corner of their bedroom. Camera, tripod, the expensive lenses Martin had convinced her she needed to develop her artistic eye. He gathered it all up and carried it to the garage, where it would wait for whatever came next. Then he poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat at the kitchen table where, just days ago, Lena had been texting Martin while pretending to eat the dinner he'd cooked for her. The whiskey was smooth and warm, nothing like the cheap wine Martin had served at his gallery exhibitions. But it served the same purpose. It marked the end of something and the uncertain beginning of something else. Eleanor called at 10:30 Sunday morning. "Martin's loading a U-Haul," she said without preamble. "Looks like he's packing everything he can fit." Evan was sitting on his front porch with coffee and the Sunday paper, a ritual he'd maintained for 15 years. The paper was full of local news and church announcements, nothing about photography exhibitions or artistic controversies. Small towns had ways of processing scandal that didn't always involve newspaper coverage. Where's he going? Nobody knows. But he's definitely leaving town, probably figured out that his reputation here is finished. Through the window, Evan could see Lena's car in the driveway. She'd come home sometime after midnight, but they hadn't spoken. She'd slept in the guest room, and this morning she'd stayed upstairs while he made coffee and retrieved the paper. "What about Lena?" Eleanor asked. "What about her? She came to see me yesterday evening. After you left the exhibition." Evan set down his coffee mug. What did she want? To understand what had really been happening. I think seeing those raw photographs, understanding how Martin documented every step of the manipulation, it finally broke through his conditioning. And she's devastated, not just embarrassed, devastated. She finally understands that what she thought was artistic collaboration was actually calculated exploitation. That Martin never saw her as a person, just as content for his private collection. Evan was quiet, watching a neighbor walk their dog down the street. Normal Sunday morning in a normal small town, except for the marriage that had ended in front of half the community 2 days ago. "She asked me to tell you something," Eleanor continued. "I don't need to hear it. She knows that." "But she asked anyway." Eleanor paused. "She said to tell you that she understands now, that she's not asking for forgiveness because she knows there's nothing to forgive her way back from. But she understands. Understanding doesn't change anything." "No, it doesn't, but it's something." After Eleanor hung up, Evan finished his coffee and read through the sports section. The high school football team was having a good season. The annual Harvest Festival was scheduled for next weekend. Life in Millbrook would continue with or without Martin's artistic vision. Around noon, he heard Lena moving around upstairs. Water running, drawers opening and closing, the sound of someone packing. She came downstairs carrying 2 suitcases and her purse, dressed in jeans and a sweater he hadn't seen her wear since before she'd started attending Martin's photography club. No makeup, no perfume, no artistic accessories. She looked like the woman he'd married, except for the hollow expression in her eyes. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a while," she said. Evan nodded. "I don't know what comes next. For us, I mean, but I know it can't be here with everyone knowing. Everyone knowing what you chose to do." Lena flinched but didn't argue. "Yes." She stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, and for a moment it seemed like she might say something else. An apology, maybe, or an explanation, or one last attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of their marriage. Instead, she set her house keys on the counter and walked out. Through the window, Evan watched her load her suitcases into her car and back out of the driveway. At the end of their street, she turned toward the highway that led out of town, in the same direction Martin's U-Haul had gone that morning. He went upstairs to see what she'd left behind. Their bedroom looked oddly sparse. She'd taken her clothes and personal items but left everything else. The wedding photos on the dresser, the books she'd been reading, the art supplies she'd accumulated over the years. On the wall where her second-place ribbon from the county fair had hung, there was now just an empty nail and a small rectangle of unfaded paint. Evan pulled the nail out and spackled over the hole, then touched up the paint with a brush he kept in the garage for small repairs. By evening, there was no evidence that anything had ever hung on that wall. His phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Martin's gone. Saw the U-Haul heading toward the interstate about an hour ago. Guess he's off to find a new muse somewhere else." Evan set his phone on the kitchen table and looked around the house that was now entirely his. It felt bigger somehow and quieter, but not empty. Just different. He poured another whiskey and sat in the living room thinking about choices and consequences and the difference between art and exploitation. Outside, Millbrook settled into another Sunday evening, and somewhere on the interstate, 2 people who'd believed they were creating something beautiful were learning the real cost of their collaboration. The exhibition at the community center would come down tomorrow. The photographs would be destroyed or returned to whoever wanted them. But the lesson would remain, archived in the collective memory of a small town that had learned to recognize the difference between artistic vision and predatory manipulation. Evan finished his whiskey and went upstairs to bed, sleeping alone in a marriage bed for the first time in 12 years. But for the first time in months, he slept without wondering where his wife really was, or what she was really doing. Truth, he thought as he drifted off, was its own form of peace.